Alrighty, guys. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, relatively hearable all around? Okay, cool. Hey guys, my name is Smokey. I'm one of the co-founders of Berachain. I'm here to talk to you about integrated liquidity, what we do at Berachain as a whole. I'm not exactly sure what integrated liquidity is either myself, but we're going to try to figure this out over the course of this presentation. We're going to start with a little bit of context on the backstory, what Berachain is, how we got here, and then we'll talk actually about the tech and what we're doing and why we think it's interesting. Cool? Okay, so first of all, basics. Unfortunately, and sorry to disappoint, we are not in L2, we're in L1. We're an EVM compatible or fully EVM equivalent L1, built on the Cosmos SDK, and powered by proof of liquidity. But we'll start with a little bit of a backstory on Berachain and how we actually got here. So Berachain did not start as a blockchain. It actually started as a whole bunch of NFTs of bears consuming drugs. We're not exactly sure what happened in the middle. We're very much trying to figure this out at the moment. But by the end, we found ourselves with a full-fledged blockchain with 8 million unique wallets, 100 million transactions on testnet, hundreds of applications building, a lot more than I'll tell you guys about in a little bit. So, at a high level, the Berachain story started actually from these NFTs that I mentioned, the Bong Bears, that were actually a set of 6 rebasing NFTs. These NFTs ended up building a community of thousands of heavily DeFi-oriented users. And what we actually found was that by drawing our initial community from these groups like Olympus, Curve, Frax, Alchemix, etc., these groups that are very, I guess, emblematic of what we would call a barbell distribution, we found ourselves with a really interesting group. So if you had 1 bear, then you got 2 bears, and you got 4 bears, and you kind of get the idea here at a high level. So what we ended up doing at Berachain was relatively different from what I've seen in most L1s or protocols being built over time. A lot of times you'll find a very exciting consensus method or a novel research technology, and you'll spin it out of a university lab, build a chain around it, build a community around that, and attempt to form something around the tech. In our case, actually, what we ended up doing was building a community, talking to those folks, actually interacting with those users, and then figuring out what problems they solved or they need to have solved and how we could work with them on that. So Berachain is actually what I'd probably see as most representative of like horseshoe theory or barbell distributions, where the far left curve and the far right curve actually align at many different points. So in our discovery time and actually talking with users, we identified a couple big things that were missing in the blockchain ecosystem as a whole. And one of the biggest unsolved logical fallacies, let's say, was really this lack of alignment between liquidity and security at the chain level. Throughout the last cycle, the Alt-L1 rotation, etc., we saw dozens of chains that had hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars sitting in their validator set, securing the network, but absolutely incapable of actually generating any transaction volume or contributing to the chain itself. So it's wonderful. The chain is secure. You can use it all day, but there's nothing actually happening there. And if we want blockchains to scale, we have to imagine that they need to be used. And that's sort of where this idea of proof of liquidity and what Berachain's really built around came to be. So the whole idea is that Berachain is here to make liquidity flexible, is here to actually align incentives between liquidity and security at the chain level without sacrificing anything and without introducing leverage risk. So how does this actually work? At the high level, proof of liquidity allows the validator set on Berachain to drive emissions and block rewards to the protocols building on top of the chain itself. This is fairly different from what we say in proof of stake chains, and what this means is that for the first time, an application actually has a reason to exist uniquely on Berachain as opposed to any other ecosystems. It is not built around predatory grant programs. It is not built around extensive handouts and gas subsidies. It's actually built such that the chain itself can power its applications and give them a unique edge around capital efficiency and liquidity acquisition in building on the network. So that means that Berachain is in service of its users and its applications. So let's talk a little bit through the tokens really quickly. Berachain's kind of funky in that we actually have 2 different tokens that contribute to the network primarily. There's one called BGT, or the Bera Governance Token, which is perhaps a little bit on the nose naming-wise. And there's another one, which is called Bera. But we'll start by talking about BGT. BGT is interesting because it's actually entirely illiquid. You cannot market buy it. You cannot go on Binance. The only way to obtain BGT is by actually doing the work of providing liquidity to the ecosystem. So at the start of the network going live, there are a set of applications built into the chain. There's a DEX, there's a perpetual futures vault, there's a stablecoin lending market, and all of these can accrue BGT from people LPing or providing liquidity to the network. BGT itself is then used to actually vote on where emissions across the entire network are distributed, such that the chain can power those different applications over time. Beyond this, BGT also earns fees from all of the different protocols being powered by the chain, such that people actually have a reason to hold it and actually can effectively choose between two paths. You can either hold this token and go long on the volume, the volatility, the general activity of the network based on its fee-generating properties, and be able to partake in governance and amplify emissions towards your own pools that you're participating in. Or you can hold Bera, the gas token of the network that all of us generally know how it works. You burn it, use it for gas, conduct transactions, etc. So that choice is something that we cared about a lot in building the chain. So when we think about a traditional value flow in a proof-of-stake chain, you see validators accruing block rewards, and that doesn't necessarily flow back into the ecosystem. So while validators play a massive role in securing a chain and actually ensuring that it is able to operate, that blocks are being built effectively, so on and so forth, they aren't actually drawing net new users in. They aren't actually helping the chain exist and grow, right? So the whole thesis of Berachain is that we try to flip the flow of value such that it is the users and the applications who are actually benefiting the most from the chain's operation itself. So how does that actually work for each party? We'll go through this really quickly. Validators are actually in a absolutely privileged position on this chain in that they actually control the flow of liquidity and emissions across the network. The validators on Berachain are the decentralized group that actually determines which pools, which smart contracts, which groups actually receive the most emissions across the network. At the same time, we look to incentivize validator protocol interactions such that for the first time, a validator and an application building on a chain can work together to bootstrap that chain's own liquidity and security at the same time. That way, an application can actually say, hey, I'm going to work with this validator. I'm going to give them X amount of my tokens, and in exchange, they're going to direct Y amount of emissions, ideally in a cash flow positive manner, to my pools, my smart contract, my contracts on the network, such that that application can actually reach a degree of activation energy. So beyond this, they earn standard commissions from transaction fees, block rewards, standard validator behavior. Protocols on the chain are actually able to utilize the governance modules itself and utilize governance in the form of BGT to actually become integrated into the set of contracts on Berachain that can earn block rewards. So while I mentioned that this initially starts with the DEX, the perps vault, the lending market, over time, any single smart contract on Berachain can actually become part of the chain and part of proof of liquidity itself. So this is what we mean by integrating liquidity into the chain, such that Berachain can push its emissions and push its block rewards to any protocol building on us, whether that is a NFT marketplace, a social fi application, a game. If it's building on Berachain, it can receive block rewards and actually be uniquely charged by the chain itself. These protocols are generally incentivized to work closely with validators such that they can bootstrap their own liquidity and do so in the most capital efficient manner possible. The important thing here is that there's an equivalent exchange, or there's a value exchange here, right? These protocols are sending their validators, and in exchange, the validators and by proxy, the stakers on the network who have contributed liquidity, they're sending them fees, they're sending them token emissions, and in exchange, they're getting their liquidity. And then finally, users. Users actually don't have to modify their behavior in the slightest. They get to have their stake and eat it too. Users are able to LP or interact with their desired apps as they always have, and at the same time, take those BGT rewards that they've accrued from interacting with those applications and use it to influence the direction of the network as a whole. And that's the part that we find most exciting, as we believe that at the end of the day, if we're not in service of the users, we're building in the wrong industry, right? So the whole choice here is that the people who have contributed the most value, as we see it in the form of liquidity, to the ecosystem are those who have the greatest benefit from its growth itself. So Berachain really is an ecosystem that is entirely driven by those who've contributed value to it. The parties who have actually given to the network are those who get the biggest say in how it actually operates over the long term. So, why do we actually care about this? Why does this all matter in any way? When we think about modeling a chain and we think about modeling an ecosystem itself, I don't think anyone cares about the chain that something is built on. When we think about the next million, the next billion users, they don't really care whether something is built on Solana or Aptos or Polygon or Berachain for that matter. What they care about is the application itself and whether it uniquely enables something that they did not have access to in the Web 2 world. Otherwise, they would have simply built it on Web 2 rails, right? They care about the transparency, they care about the permissionless nature, they care about the verifiability of all these things happening on the blockchain, and they care about their user experience. And when we think about that as a chain, our goal is to enable as many first-class builders to take their applications from 0 to 1 in an environment where we're built to help them. And that is really the idea of Berachain and proof of liquidity as a whole. It's built to turbocharge that next generation of application builders because we really do see a chain as the sum of its parts. the chain is never meant to be the main character. The chain is meant to be a foundation layer, a background, a base plate that these applications can thrive from. So, we ask ourselves, how's this gone so far? And while we're still in the very, very early stages, and I don't think that we're, anywhere close to the finish line, we've seen a lot of promising early stages of success from the proof of liquidity model itself. There are 200+ projects building within the Berachain ecosystem that we know and have worked with closely. There's been, over $25 million brought into, pre-launch projects in the ecosystem. The testnet has been one of the most active ones in history, and there's over 50 TGEs already planned on the network that we expect to give a, healthy ground once the chain is live. So, in short, when we think about it, Berachain's the best place to take your application from 0 to 1, and we want to be the home for that class of best-in-class builders. And, the whole goal for us at the end of the day is to be able to use proof of liquidity to help make sure that people build the next category-defining application on Berachain, and to lower their barrier to entry, to increase their escape velocity, and to remove activation energy for those groups who are looking to redefine the future of crypto. Thank you so much, guys.